Hey, I'm Sarah Hodges, and this is Executives Uncut, the podcast where we provide solutions for the corporate cycle of hell. And today we're talking about self leadership. And I am so excited to be here with Anna Houden, the Associate Leadership Coach at Hodges Coaching. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you. Hello, hello. Good morning.
Anna is muted. Wait.
Uh-oh.
There we go. We're at a little audio issue there. It's a great way to start a podcast with audio issues.
We've been having them all
Uh,
morning. Am I here?
You're here. You're here. You're
Okay.
delayed, but I think we're okay.
Okay.
Awesome.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning. Now, Anna and I met because she actually reached out to me on LinkedIn and was looking for a mentor. So I was very honored, obviously. And when I talked to her for like half an hour, she just seemed so motivated. I love the fact that she was ICF certified and took the initiative to make that happen herself, which is a big deal. And also, she talked a lot about self leadership, which I'm extremely passionate about. And to be honest, I don't really talk to many other coaches. I don't think ever, and I'm sure there are others who do, but I have not come in contact with people who talk about self leadership, and that is such an important part of Anna's belief system. So I was like, "You want to come on board?" And she was like, "Yeah." We talked about it for a
Okay.
while, and yeah, it was really cool how it worked out. At least I hope you think so too, but I certainly do.
Yeah, I agree. I actually was talking to someone about this weekend. I was like, we were talking about how a lot of people won't reach out on LinkedIn or like just put themselves out there. And I was like, yeah. And then when you called me and you were like, hey, I have this idea and it's kind of weird, just hold with me. And I was like, are we sure about this, girl? And then I was like, all right, this is cool.
Yeah, and it's been really fun too to teach you the Hodges coaching methodologies and the A+ method and the 5 elements of self leadership.
Mhm.
And so I'm wondering, I'm sure that it's changed and adjusted your definition of self leadership, but still today, how do you define self leadership? Because a lot of people in our audience are like, what the hell is that? You know?
Yes. And I get that a lot. It's like, okay, so what is self-leadership? And then like, what does that mean when you're like a self-leadership coach or especially in executive coaching? So, I would say self-leadership is when you start to take recognition of yourself and lead your own life. So I would like really, if you think about the word confidence, right? When you're moving yourself into when you finally are confident in yourself, you know that you have flaws, you know that you're accepting them. So a lot of times, like, I think people think, especially in the corporate world, that we need to be perfect to achieve or we need to overwork to achieve. And it's like, well, what if we could just figure out how we tick? What if we could figure out who exactly we are, what we worked best to be more efficient and like increase our productivity ourselves. So really understanding who we are, what language we speak, and then diving into those practices. And that's like where self-leadership lands with me is like, who are we and how do we tick so we can more increase that efficiently and we can like increase our productivity. And then when the moment we figure out our own self-leadership, that's when we lead others efficiently. I think that's what you and I both believe is has to start
Yeah.
with self-leadership to then lead others. Is
Yeah,
that kind
I,
of,
I would totally. I think it just, it's how you lead you, right? It's the
yeah.
way you show up. And I think I love what you said about being imperfect because it's really finding a sense of security, including, your own imperfections,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that like one thing that I would also say is that, you know, it's I often say this, it's self-leadership is owning your half of a professional relationship because
Yep.
everybody has these like infinity signs. I call it it's a lemniscat, right? And like I say something that goes to you and you say something in response to me. And over time those patterns get really ingrained, right? And it doesn't matter if we're leading someone or we're the follower or whatever. You have these relationships and you predict the patterns, you predict what people are going to say, and you start to scapegoat, you start to blame game. And self leadership is all about owning your half. It's being aware of how you're showing up and being aware of how you're showing up to yourself. Would you elaborate on that at all?
Yeah, no, what you just said honestly made me really like dive into so like your relationship with yourself, right?
Mhm.
So that's a huge thing with self-leadership is having this relationship with yourself and realizing how you tick. So I think something I've kind of talked to you about is love languages. If you don't know it, look it up. They're the best. But we all have our own language that we speak, whether it's in our relationship, our corporate setting, how we are in interpersonal conversations. anything. And the thing is when you have your own language and you're speaking something and you're speaking Spanish, let's just say, and someone else that you're talking to is speaking French, you could scream at them as much as you want, but if they don't understand Spanish, then you're not going to be able to communicate effectively with them.
Mm-hmm.
And then learning how to pick up other people's languages so you can not only speak theirs, but you can explain your language to them. You can explain that you speak Spanish and they speak French. Like you can, that's
Right.
what I feel like self-leadership is when you understand your language with yourself, you understand your relationship with self, and then you're able to explain to other people who you are, how you function. And then you're also have that empathy piece, which is a huge part of self-leadership, is asking questions, having empathy, understanding others. So then you want to pick up their language, because you're not, like, you're dictating, like, if someone learns this and this and this way, but you're teaching them this and this and this way, like, how are they going to learn that effectively? And then how is that going to help productivity?
Yeah, I absolutely, I love that so much. And I love that you brought up the piece of empathy, but it's really, really hard to be empathetic with others if you can't do it with yourself first.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reason why. So, for all of you out there who aren't familiar with it, at Hodges Coaching, we have 5 elements of self-leadership. We have self-acceptance, self-awareness, self-governance, self-compassion, and self-validation. And we evaluate all 5 of these areas and then help our leaders develop where they need to. But I know that self-acceptance and self-awareness, when I was teaching you the A plus method, which for those of you who don't understand, is kind of the coaching machine. It's our methodology underneath the rest of this. And the A plus method teaches self-acceptance and then self-awareness, and it's for that reason, right? It's so that we can accept our situation, and it allows us to have empathy for people around us. You're able to accept, I speak Spanish and you speak French, and so I do need to adapt. And then becoming aware of when you have to adapt for that person or for yourself, because you may want to speak French but you speak Spanish, right? This analogy is amazing. But you had some confusions, right, when I taught you the self-acceptance before self-awareness piece. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? I hear your doggy in the background.
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay. That's why
I
we're going live, babe.
I know, right? I got a puppy who doesn't get along with the older dog, and well,
No.
whatever. But yes. So I think how a lot of times we're taught in everyday life, especially when you do develop, you want to really push into yourself, your own self-leadership, your own self-acceptance. You learn that whole the awareness, right? It's number one that everyone's like, okay, be aware of your issues. Where in the A plus method, we go acceptance first. And I was just like, okay, so don't you need to be aware of something to then accept it? But that's not, at least, and like, correct me if I'm wrong, how we're kind of talking about it. It's accept where you're at, accept yourself, like accept understanding, what language you speak, what pace you're at, where your flaws are, where your strengths are. And then every day moving forward towards your goals, towards what your company wants, towards where your productivity needs to be, have that awareness daily. Have the awareness then, once you've accepted where you're at, who you are, have the awareness daily, walking into what you need to work on, what you need to fix, what is working for you. Having that awareness comes after that acceptance, because now you know who you are. Now you know what makes you tick. Now you know the language you speak. Then you can be aware of, if you're picking up a different dialogue, if you're dialect, if you're picking up, if you need to be aware of someone else's speech, like that's when that comes next. Does that kind of like help? That's how I really picked it up. And you explained that really well. And I know you had a great example of that, but I hope that to me, that's how I shifted into that. Okay, accept, then daily awareness to move into where we want to be.
Yeah. And I think it really comes from the shame blame game, right? Like, we're all complete dicks to ourselves. Like, maybe there's someone out there who's like, no, I compliment myself on a daily basis, in which case you're awesome, but this podcast is probably not for you.
I talk about that all the time.
Right?
I'm like, look at yourself in the face and be like, hey, like, honestly, like, I tell it all the time. I'm like, all right, just say 3 compliments to yourself. And I'm like, I honestly could not look myself in the mirror and tell myself 3 compliments. Like, none of us can do that and feel sane about ourselves. Like, we are such buttholes to ourselves.
Yes, and so that's why we do it's true that's why we do self-acceptance first. Because if you're super self-aware, that's great. But then if you're judging yourself about everything that you're doing, oh, I'm super aware that I'm doing this shitty thing, and then you're telling yourselves all sorts of terrible things about yourself, right? That's not going to be helpful to you. That's going to raise
Yes.
your stress level if you're attacking yourself for the way you're showing up in this world. But if you evaluate your the way you're showing up in this world with acceptance, with
Mhm.
non-judgmental kind of distance sort of observation, it makes it much easier for you to learn and understand, and then start to generate ideas of how you want to change it, but from not from a place of self-loathing. Like, that's not what we want, right? Because that's going to it's going to make it harder to be self-compassionate, and it's going to be harder to validate yourself, and it's going to be harder to govern yourself, because you're putting responsibilities and you're putting expectations on yourself that are obviously too extreme if you're going to just beat yourself up and be your own slave driver all the time.
Mhm.
So, hope that clarifies. And speaking of which, so you were telling me a story earlier about one of your clients who
Mhm.
was having some confidence issues, and some of this came up. Are you open to sharing that story?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, I obviously have my own clients as well outside of working with you. And when what I kind of specify on is as well with executive solutions, but also transitioning people in careers, and stuff like that. So when this particular person was, leaving a career after 20 years and they were still, young, and they had a lot of self-doubt, deprivation kind of, and a lot of negativity towards their past job. So they kept saying that they looked like they were way too old on a resume since they were at that company for 20 years, but they're still in their like early 40s. They carried a lot of negativity from the past, company. So what they did was when they left the company, it wasn't on exactly great terms. The company was a little bit toxic for her, and for that client. And kind of what had happened was she just took that with her, just the negativity, all the kind of bad things that they said, like, even comments that were like, "You're not going to go anywhere once you leave us."
Ugh.
And that's a hard thing. So when she came to me and was like, "Hey, I need to find a new job. I need to step into something else. Like, what do I do? Where do I go?" She felt like she had no, like, she had no experience. She felt like she literally was like so experienced in only one thing, and she was really in this self-doubting, and she needed to step into a confident place. She needed to understand herself, and she needed to grasp self-leadership again. What we realized is that, like, we didn't even work on a lot of like the career coaching and like the resume building and like the moving into the next thing. We had to work on, where are you at? Let's find your confidence again. Let's find where you need to be, and let's self-lead yourself. Find your own language, find who you are, find what makes you tick, and find what your strengths are, because she literally couldn't list that she had any strengths. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was a huge part of it, just moving from there. And like when the click in her head to be like, oh, like that's the issue, not that I like can't fill out a resume, was a huge shift when she started to be like, all right, this is what I want to do, and this is what I'm actually really good at. If that kind of like,
Yeah.
it really just shows like where you can just take a few steps back to be like, all right, self-acceptance, where's our language, where are our strengths, and like what kind of questions we need to ask ourselves to move ourselves forward and be the best leaders we can be moving forward.
Yes, absolutely. And I find the same thing where I have a lot of executives who come to me for productivity. And we work on productivity,
Mm,
but a lot of times you have to figure out, okay, well, why is it that you aren't being productive? Or I have a lot of leaders who come to me for difficult relationships. That's actually probably one of the most common things that I talk about in coaching, is because interpersonal relationships, professional relationships can be really challenging. And it's not like one person is bad and another person is good. We just often have different languages, like you were saying earlier. And I think that self leadership comes in really helpful when you want to change the narrative, because we intuit a lot of times why people are doing the way that they're doing, right? We tell
mhm,
ourselves a story about it, like, oh,
mhm,
they're doing this because blank, and usually that story does not benefit us. And it's all just a story. It's all just made up
mhm,
shit. And the truth is, oftentimes that person does not have the self-awareness to know that they're even showing up in a certain way anyway. A really good example of this is I was recently coaching a C-suite executive who was frustrated because their CEO wasn't checking in on them, like, at all. Like, they had meetings that the CEO just never called them, and they were really frustrated, and they told themselves this story, right, that the CEO just didn't care.
mhm,
Um, and through their work, their internal work, and the self-leadership piece, they started to realize that maybe it was just that the CEO trusted them. And I was like, to be honest, I thought that in the first place. But because it's interesting, right? How when you
Yeah.
have that distance and you're hearing a story, you're like, oh, cool, they trust you, and you're thinking that, and then the person says to you, oh, they just don't care, and you're like, because at the end of the day, it's just all a bullshit story you're telling yourself. You
Yeah.
might as well tell yourself a story that benefits you. like,
No, I can't agree more. Because that's the thing is what we do is we rack up in our heads and we're like, okay, they hate me and they really don't trust me and this is that. And like whether you have a micromanager or a manager who stays apart, like I have plenty of clients who are like, they don't ever check in on me. I don't ever get any feedback. Like, how do I know if I'm doing anything good? They're so upset with me all the time and they're like living in this anxious state. And I'm like, okay, what could they possibly be thinking besides that? What else is there out there? Well, maybe they trust me and you're like, all right, well, how would your day look better? How would it look? How would your day look if you thought that they thought you were the number one employee they had? And they're like, well,
yeah.
like a lot different. So yeah, it's just changing. If you can't get the story from them, if you can't have those conversations with that person, it's just putting it in your head that like maybe they do see you in a different light. Maybe they do trust you. Maybe they do think you're, doing exactly what you need to be doing. And I love that. Change the narrative to saying what's great about and like the positivities. And that's what we have to feed ourselves is how instead of we just live in this negative world and it's been a very hard year for a lot of people. So it's really easy to get wrapped in this like, woe is me, poor me. Oh, no. And like, you just like, literally you're drowning. And it's like, what could we do if we were like, I'm moving forward. I got this, and everyone trusts me. And I can, if I make a mistake, I just learn from it. It's not a failure. It's a learning process, and I can never fail. I can only learn day in, day out. Yes. What could that do?
Well, and I do want to pause and specify for any listeners out there who are like, well, sometimes there just is genuine, real conflict and you have to have a conversation. And we are not saying don't have an open, vulnerable, empathetic conversation with that person. We're saying that before you have that conversation, if you have that conversation, to look at the situation from many different perspectives.
Come into it different. Yep.
Yes, because it's going to help you with your own confidence. It's going to make you feel more secure. It's going to make you able to empathize with that person when you walk in the door and have that conversation. It allows you to self-lead before you interact with your team.
Yeah, no, you're talking to two girls who you go in, you have the conversation, you're like, hey, what's the matter? Where are you at with me? Call me up, let's go. I'm not saying don't have the conversation, but yes, I love that.
Yes. We're the same way. We learned that when we were like negotiating our contract and all of that. We're both very direct, but it was because we do the self-leadership work behind the scenes. We're showing up in our strength and showing up, being able to empathize with the other person, give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yes.
So I think we're ready to move into some coaching tips. What do you think? All right. So quick tips. When you are frustrated with another team member, ask yourself how you're showing up. That's it. That's the tip. Just ask yourself how you're showing up. That can go a very long way. And I think it's also important to know that when you are secure in self-leadership, you won't scapegoat anyone else when things go wrong. You'll give them the benefit of the doubt. You'll be strong enough to look within and say, where could I have done this? How could I have done this better? Right. So, the need to scapegoat, the need to blame another person is a strong indication that maybe you're not as secure in self-leadership as you could be. And there's nothing wrong with that. That just means there's room for improvement. So as promised, we have a just straight up coaching challenge for you this week. We all tell ourselves a story about why people are behaving the way they are. And if you're going to tell a story, you might as well tell one that benefits you and makes you feel good. So this week, try to notice, are you telling yourselves negative stories and mind reading about your coworkers? And if you are, look at it from some different perspectives. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they actually just trust you, or maybe they're just having a bad day and you don't need to take it so personally. All right, Anna, any other thoughts before we say goodbye?
No, I love that. Carry it into your week, that like change the narrative. If you can feed yourself like positivity, do that. We all need that at this time. And the more we like feed ourselves negativity is just going to be detrimental to our businesses and our relationships with our staff and ourselves and our personal lives. So yes, feeding ourselves those kind of conversations, I'm so very behind. I can't even like stress it enough. You and I've talked about that a ton, but
Yeah.
I'm excited to hear your feedback on that. So yeah.
Yes, and listen, Anna's open for business, right? She's taking new clients at Hodges
Yeah.
Coaching. So if you want to work with Anna, if you think that she's awesome, she is, then go to hodgescoaching.com and click on contact, or you can read more about her bio by clicking on hodgescoaching.com and click on the team. So thanks so much, Anna, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Executives Uncut.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And listen, everyone, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to subscribe and share with someone who could benefit from it. You can also visit hodgescoaching.com for new episodes of the podcast or follow us at Hodges Coaching on social media. I'm Sarah Hodges, and I'll see you next week.